Welcome to Macquarie Street, the national political podcast coming to you from the crucible of Australian democracy. Here's your host, Lyle Shelton.
This is a story that caught my attention this morning. Probably you're not too happy about it, Matt, I imagine. Maverick Nationals MP George Christensen, who was retiring at this election, now he's going to run for Parliament for Pauline Hanson's One Nation party. Matt, what a turncoat.
Well, it is a desertion, Ali, of especially the hard-working members of our party that have supported George for many years. All of us really only get into Parliament with the support of a team and hundreds and thousands of others. And, you know, just the other week he was telling those supporters that he wouldn't run at this election, and things have changed very quickly. So there's some questions there to ask of George.
Hello and welcome. It's great to have your company. You're with the political podcast that goes where the mainstream media won't. We look at the issues, the real issues confronting our nation, and they are not the same as the agenda promoted by our political class and cultural elites. Well, the Prime Minister has fired the election starter's gun for a long campaign in the lead up to a May 21 election. What was looking to be a lacklustre campaign between two major parties who have no big agenda apart from agreeing pretty much on the same woke agenda. They're both signed up to economy-harming net zero policies and both are signed up to anti-life, anti-family policies. The big story of this election, though, is not what is being focused on by the media. A couple of big rocks have been thrown into the pond in this first week of the campaign. The first is the surprise dual announcements by the former LNP's member for Dawson in North Queensland, George Christensen, that and that was the subject, of course, of the cold opening. He's resigning from the LNP, saying it no longer aligns with his values, and B, that he is reneging on his retirement to join One Nation, running as a Senate candidate alongside Pauline Hanson. Now, this is to be one of the shortest political retirements in history, although it is unlikely George will be elected as number 3 on the One Nation Senate ticket. Now, I count myself as a friend of George's. We've known each other since our local government days in the early 2000s when he was a member of the Macquarie City Council and I was a member of the Toowoomba City Council. But when I interviewed him for this podcast last week, he gave no hint that he was about to leave the LNP and join One Nation and then run against his own party. I'm as surprised as Matt Canavan. Now, George's move this week is a major disruptor and it is the latest earthquake as the LNP's base continues to fragment because of the LNP's drift away from mainstream Australians. I'll bring you my interview with George later in this program, and you can watch, or for my podcast listeners, listen to it through the filter of this week's bombshell announcement. Now, George has been a rare parliamentarian who has stood for principle, and what he has to say, reflecting on 11 years in Parliament, is worth listening to. You'll find this interview really enlightening. Now, the other rock in the pond this week is the Liberals' candidate for Tony Abbott's old seat of Warringah on Sydney's Northern Beaches. They've pre-selected a woman by the name of Catherine Deves to go against Zali Steggall, the former Olympic skier. Zali, of course, is part of the woke Green Left, despite pretending to be an independent. But I digress. Catherine Deves, she's the founder of Save Women's Sport Australia. Now, Scott Morrison doesn't want to talk about the rainbow political movement's war on women and children. Deves, who lives at Manly, has built a media profile fighting to keep biological males out of girls' and women's sports. The woke Morrison government sadly released guidelines in 2019 recommending that girls' and women's sporting clubs allow biological males to compete with and shower with the girls. After spending the last 3 years ducking and weaving on the harmful rainbow indoctrination of children and its infiltration in sports, Morrison is now mustering some courage. Dee's pre-selection is a potential game changer, and I'll have more to say about that in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at what's at stake for our nation as Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese go hard on personality politics but light on policy in the run-up to May 21.
People often ask me in the years I've been out of politics, what is leadership quality, what do you think is important? I think the most important thing any political leader must do is to stand for things, to argue things, to fight for things. And unless you do that, both against your opponents and within your own party, I don't think people take you seriously.
That was, of course, former Prime Minister John Howard speaking this week on Sky News. While he was trying to help the coalition's prospects of getting re-elected, sadly his comments on leadership apply equally, in my view, to both sides of politics. Here's why. Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese this week laid out what they think the May 21 election is all about. Both miss the real issues confronting Australia, to which I'll come to shortly. Both are making the contest about leadership as if the Prime Ministership was a personality contest. Morrison claims he has experience and that Albanese is a risk. Albanese claims Morrison's character is wanting and that he has fresh vision for the future. But many commentators rightly observe that the policy differences between the Liberal National Coalition and Labor, doubtless heavily influenced by the Greens, are minimal. On climate, they are both signed up to the economy-damaging net zero policy. Both claim they will not increase taxes, both say they will strengthen our defence forces, and both say they can deal with our eye-watering debt over time by growing the economy. Labor is promising free stuff like free TAFE, cheaper hospitals, more money for aged care, and cheaper electricity. These are all great ideas, but it's not clear how they can be paid for without raising taxes or cutting services elsewhere. The issue facing Australia are eerily similar to what they were in 2019 when I was campaigning as a Senate candidate with Cory Bernardi's now defunct Australian Conservatives. Only now, all of the problems we identified back then have become greater. We campaigned then to fix Australia's looming energy crisis, debt crisis, and freedoms crisis. Despite Morrison presenting as a Conservative after toppling Malcolm Turnbull, the can has only been kicked down the road on all these issues. The continued reckless closure of coal-fired power stations without replacing their generating capacity with like is edging us closer to an expensive energy crisis. The prolonged overreaction to the COVID pandemic has pushed our debt beyond $1 trillion, with the government handouts just throwing petrol on the inflation fire and putting pressure on interest rates. The word woke is now part of the vernacular as crazy ideology restricting freedom of speech and religion, with many of us now being dragged before the courts. Christian and Muslim schools are under the most pressure, with neither side of politics willing to help them. Such is the power of the LGBTIQA lobby, which demands they surrender their diversity for rainbow conformity. Neither party will amend Section 18C of the Federal Racial Discrimination Act or override the equivalent anti-free speech sections of state anti-discrimination laws. Freedom of speech and freedom of religion should be front and centre of this election campaign. A free country like Australia should never have drifted away from such principles, but the long march of the cultural Marxists has been very successful. In terms of the biggest social justice issue facing our nation, the killing of the unborn, both major parties and virtually all the minor parties, Australian Christians in Western Australia are the exception, but they all support the status quo of taxpayer-funded abortion to birth. Both major parties talk a big game on cost of living pressures on families, but neither will end the financial penalties against families who choose to care for their children at home. Both parties talk a big game on violence against women, but neither has a strategy to deal with one of its root causes, pornography. To its credit, the Morrison government did have a crack at reforming the woke national school curriculum. This teaches children that their gender is fluid and that Australia had an illegitimate and racist settlement. But the advocacy work and cleaning out of the bureaucracy has not even begun. It has been too little, too late, and our kids are being brainwashed into hating Australia. This should have been addressed much earlier in what has been 9 years of a supposedly conservative government. LGBTIQA plus wokeness is so laced through the government that Dr. Brendan Murphy, the Secretary of the Department of Health last week, could not give a definition of woman when asked. "I'll have to take that on notice, Senator," he said in response to a question from Senator Alex Antic. The Morrison government has not even had the will or the courage to rescind transgender guidelines for girls and women's sport launched in 2019 by its hapless sports minister, Senator Richard Colbeck. Tasmanian Senator Claire Chandler is courageously promoting a private senator's bill to save women's sport from the intrusion of biological males. But anyone who knows anything about politics knows that unless Scott Morrison makes it a government bill, it will go nowhere. His support for Chandler's bill is disingenuous. Morrison and Albanese spend the next 6 weeks in lockstep promoting woke policies which conform to a globalist social and climate policy agenda while making the election campaign a personality contest. The real contest for ideas about freedom, the rights of the unborn, how to strengthen families, lowering the debt and how to build a strong economy that has energy security at the heart of it will go undebated. Our nation is on the wrong track. Establishment politicians are on a unity ticket of climate alarmism and wokeness. There are few dissenting voices. Few have the courage to do what they know in their gut is right. The perks of office are not worth sacrificing. Fringe parties will provide a modicum of dissent, which is useful, but in my opinion, Clive Palmer and Pauline Hanson, as much as I admire their willingness to take on the establishment, don't have the answers or the strength of character to lead us out of the mess. The Liberal Democrats, led by former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman, will push libertarian social policy like euthanasia. The election will be framed as a leadership contest between Morrison and Albanese. This will be a mirage because no one is offering the leadership our nation needs. Several commentators have said this will be a Seinfeld election styled after the 1990s sitcom, which was funny because it was about nothing. But there's nothing funny about the state of our nation. Let's be praying. The leadership we need will emerge in time. Just don't expect it to be during the next 6 weeks. It was good to see Scott Morrison engage the culture wars on day one of this 40-day election campaign. He has spent most of his prime ministership dodging them. His candidate for Tony Abbott's old seat of Warringah is the co-founder of the Save Women's Sport organisation, Catherine Deves. She's been working to stop biological males at the behest of the rainbow political lobbyists from ruining girls' and women's sport. Deves will take on the ultra-woke Zali Steggall, who, if journalists were doing their job, would ask her to define woman. That someone has to create an organisation to fight to keep blokes out of girls' sports shows just how insane our world has become. A media that thinks intelligence is measured by an ability to transcend biology doesn't get it, and many tried to paint Morrison as a transphobic bigot for these comments. Take a listen.
Catherine Deves over there in Warringah, she's standing up for something really important, and that is to ensure that, when it comes to, girls playing sport and women playing sport, they're playing against people of the same sex.
Now, Morrison went on to say that he would have more to say on this issue. This is very interesting. Could he be shaping to make saving women's sport an election issue? After allowing his hapless Sports Minister Richard Colbeck to release, on behalf of his government, transgender guidelines designed to corral girls' and women's sporting clubs into allowing biological males to compete against and shower with females, Morrison now seems to be mustering some courage. If he was fair dinkum, he'd put Colbeck out in front of the cameras tomorrow, tearing up the guidelines. Mainstream Australians would cheer, rainbow political activists and the media would set their hair on fire for a day, and the Libs would go on to win the election. Nonetheless, it's great to see Morrison backing Deves and Senator Claire Chandler's private senator's bill to save women's sports, a bill that will likely go nowhere unless the government makes it a government bill. It's a shame Morrison couldn't show a modicum of support to City Point Christian College for its enrolment policy. Like Deves and Chandler, City Point is simply wanting to keep biological males out of girls' toilets and to save their sports at school. A large part of the reason Morrison won't back City Point's Christian enrolment policy is because the backlash from the woke rainbow activists is always swift, brutal, and amplified by their fellow travellers in the mainstream media. The truth doesn't stand a chance. Just look at the dream-run transgender Australian footballer Hannah Mounsey got in response to Morrison's comments supporting Deves. Scott Morrison has never cared about women before. Why is he caring now? Said the biological male who smashed up plenty of women before the AFLW decided it was too dangerous for him to play. Of all the concerns women have and are passionate about, this is not one of them, Mounsey told the Daily Telegraph. He should repeat this outside the goat cheese circle of Sydney or Melbourne. Mums and dads in the suburbs want their girls to compete against girls, not boys or men. I'm exhausted. If it's good enough for the Olympics that we play, it should be good enough for Scott Morrison. Now, Mounsey was referring to the International Olympics Committee's decision to let biological men identifying as women to compete at last year's Tokyo Olympic Games. We just want to be allowed to play, he said, with no hint of concern for what the women who miss out might think as they make way for men identifying as women. The Telegraph then brought in Anna Brown, formerly of the 2017 Yes campaign to de-gender marriage. As a committed rainbow activist, she didn't lay down her weapons when the Yes campaign won. There were bigger frontiers to move on to, like teaching children that gender is fluid. Brown now heads the full-time campaign machine, Equality Australia, which takes Christian schools to court for upholding their Christian ethos in this post-same-sex marriage era. Here's what Brown told the media. The political parties that wish to form government this coming election must commit to governing for all Australians and ensuring that every person in Australia can live their life with dignity and respect no matter who they are or who they love. This obviously has nothing to do with 6-foot blokes in skirts smashing girls in the netball. And then the modern Liberals joined the pile on Scott Morrison and Deves. Woke Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg told The Guardian he was worried Morrison might announce an unnecessary ban on biological males playing female sports. For his whole Prime Ministership, Morrison has sat back as the rainbow wave rolled through our schools and sporting clubs. Could Catherine Deves have brought one of the most important issues facing girls and women into the front and centre of what has been shaping up as a Seinfeld election, an election about nothing? Clearly, the Liberal Party doesn't want to talk about saving women's sports. Deves' involvement in this cause, despite her high profile media profile before the election, she makes no mention of this on her campaign website. In fact, she's deleted tweets this week about girls being experimented on and having their bodies mutilated and sterilised. Let's hope she stays strong and doesn't let the woke Liberal Party cause her to capitulate on telling the truth about harmful rainbow gender fluid ideology. If the media was doing its job, it would ask Albanese what he thinks about biological males taking to the paddock with girls. This is one of the biggest issues facing the children of our nation, yet the big parties and the mainstream media are running a protection racket for LGBT activists. We need this issue debated under the gaze of an election campaign.
I actually don't like coming to Canberra anymore. The parliamentary processes to me seem so stale and staged. Question time's a farce where government backbenchers ask pointless questions written by someone else and opposition members ask pointless gotcha questions that never get answers. And the public hate the vitriol and behaviour displayed during question time. I'm guilty. I stand condemned as being part of that behaviour. The matter of public importance is nothing more than a sop to those who want to relive their high school or university debating club years. And votes and proceedings could just simply be dialed in. They're that predictable. We say something in favour of a government bill, the opposition say something against it, and we all vote for it or against it depending on what the party says. I mean, in the Labor Party you get expelled for doing anything else. On our side you just get ostracised. What happened to individuality in this place? What happened to critical thinking? What happened to true representation? As a nation, we bemoan the fact that most politicians are white-bread cookie-cutter replicas of one another, but on the other hand, we decry a spark of individuality as chaos, destabilisation and disunity, or at least the media does. We can't have it both ways. There needs to be greater room in this place for backbenchers to say what they really think publicly in this chamber and to vote accordingly. The notion of party discipline needs to give way to representation, just like it does in many other legislatures around the world. Otherwise, we run the risk of Parliament House degenerating into a sheltered workshop for people who can't think for themselves.
Well, as I said in the top of the show, I recorded an interview with my friend George Christensen last week, principally to talk about his excellent valedictory speech to Parliament, which he gave just 2 weeks ago. I certainly recommend going online and listening to the entire speech. It's a rare example of principled parliamentary oratory. Now, since George and I spoke, he has announced he's coming out of retirement and running as number 3 on the One Nation Senate ticket in Queensland. It's essentially an unwinnable position, so it will be a short-lived return to politics before he retires again after May 21. But it will give Pauline Hanson a big leg up as she faces competition from Clive Palmer and Campbell Newman, 2 other disgruntled former LNP members. What George is doing is simply giving his old party a big whack on the way out. This interview will give you an insight into his thinking. Well, it's a great privilege to have once again on the Macquarie Street Political Podcast and this live stream tonight my good friend George Christensen MP, who has recently given his valedictory speech at Parliament. He's retiring at the upcoming election. And George is the member for Dawson, based on the seat of Macquarie, North Queensland. George, thanks so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it.
And thanks very much, Lyle, for having us on your show.
George, I want to unpack your very excellent speech. I listened to it today. I was really moved by it, I think partly because I've known you for probably more than 20 years. But I think even putting aside that, just the things that you were saying about our nation really impacted me. But before I get to the valedictory, you spoke at a conference that I was at recently in Queensland, Dave Pello's Church and State Conference, and you explained to the audience there why you were leaving. You used the phrase, politics is broken. That's a hurtful thing for an Australian to hear, but I think we all know it. But tell us, just unpack that. Why is politics broken, and why is that thought part of you leaving politics at a relatively young age in your early 40s?
I think I alluded to it a bit in my valedictory speech as well. But look, I think by and large, politics is downstream of culture. And it's true to say that there's something that's amiss in the modern Australian culture, something that doesn't gel right for someone that was even born in the late 1970s. As Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck, I'm not sure which one of them used to say, we've taken a wrong way to Albuquerque somewhere. But you can't put your finger on the exact moment or the exact crisis or situation that caused it. But, if we have a look at the same-sex marriage referendum, here we were upending a tried and tested cultural institution that's served us very well. And I think that actually shocked quite a few people, how far down the chain that the nation had actually gone in terms of its cultural leanings. So, we're going to get to it later, but I rattled off like a litany of the things that I think that Conservatives should be focusing on. But I'm under no illusion to say that a lot of those things probably aren't popular. Yeah. And so you can't think to change hearts and minds at the ballot box or even via legislation. You've got to do it beforehand. It's going to be a very difficult task for people of our political and faith persuasions, because we hear about the long march of the left. Well, whether it's the left or cultural Marxism or the wokeistas, whatever it is, they've captured the institutions. Certainly, captured academia. We've written that off a long time ago. They've largely captured the legacy media. They've captured the new free speech, not free speech, the new, I guess, arbiters of what is permitted speech, and that is big tech. And also now they've captured corporations. So we look around and there's no friends left for true freedom. There's no friends left for free speech. There's no friends left for traditionalism.
You entered the Parliament, though, George, 11 years ago. Did you think this 11 years ago, when you first entered as a relatively young man, I guess you're in your early 30s at the time, has it got as bad as this in the last decade or so?
Yeah, look, it's a very good question, one that I'll have to ponder a bit more on. But first blush reaction is that no, I don't think it was as bad as this 11 years ago. There might have been a bit of naivety to me then as well, that maybe didn't see what was going on. But, I think that by and large, I won't pull any punches. I think actually you've said this, Lyle, it's Conservatives who've been in the public square, who haven't spoken up when issues come up, because they might get something nasty might be said about them by the ABC or by the Guardian or whoever else, so they've shut up. And vacating the field means that you you only leave one side of the argument being heard by the bulk of the populace.
And that's why, George, so many of us are disappointed that you're leaving the Parliament, because you're one of the few who have spoken up.
Yeah. I thought you were getting in one last attempt there. So
I was. Don't worry. I'll keep trying, George.
But what's very scary about that is that we sort of voluntarily vacated the field by and large, but now that field is forcibly being vacated by the guardians, as I said, or the arbiters of what's correct speech these days. And that's big tech, that's Facebook, that's YouTube, that's Google, and all the rest of them.
George, I think the scariest thing that I think you said in your speech that really hit me in the guts really hard, because I still like to think of the Australian Parliament as an institution for all Australians. It's the pinnacle of our democracy. It defines our freedom. But you said my values differed from the government that I'm a part of and from the political party, the Liberal National Party. And then you said, I'm freeing myself knowing it is a world, i.e. it, the Parliament, it is a world I don't belong to anymore. Now, I'd always hoped that as a citizen of this country that that Parliament is, even though I'm not a member of the Parliament, it represents me. It should always be a world that every Australian should feel that they belong to, that because the people there represent them. But you said, as someone who I think has very mainstream values, that it's a different world, that you don't belong there anymore, and that's part of the reason you're leaving. I think that's I just thought that was really frightening.
Yeah, look, I don't know what to say to you. I mean, in terms of the bulk of people in the Parliament, it's certainly the views that I hold by and large probably don't coalesce with either of the two major parties anymore. There is space for the minor parties, but it gets incredibly crowded out, particularly in the House of Representatives. I'm not saying anything negative about those parties, but when there is a majority government, by and large, they are relegated to just simply taking potshots, pretty much like an opposition. So, and you look to see how Craig Kelly is treated in the federal Parliament. Whenever he gets up to speak, not only do they harangue him when he's speaking, but I've actually seen again and again attempts to actually shut him down and stop him from speaking in the national Parliament. Just think about that: an elected member of Parliament getting up and making a speech, and repeated attempts to silence him from speaking. Full stop. So. That's the sort of thing I mean.
Well, you said in your speech that you expressed the frustration and the disappointment that backbenchers weren't free to speak their minds publicly in this chamber and to vote against party policy. So I guess that's part of why Craig Kelly left. But I've lost my train of thought there. But you're obviously saying that there should be that scope to speak.
Yes.
Yeah. You said, and then on the Labor side, sorry, this is where I was getting at. You said on the Labor side that if you vote against the party, you're expelled, which those of us who follow politics know that. Not many in the Australian public know that a Labor person who crosses the floor gets expelled from the party. So you said a Labor person gets expelled, but a Liberal person or a National Party person gets ostracised, and that's what you're getting at with Craig Kelly. So the pressure to shut up about things that you feel are important, that you think need to be discussed, is that pressure to shut up is massive, isn't it?
Yeah, and then every so often you'll get a phone call from someone senior in the government telling you to shut up. I mean, which is just absolutely outrageous for an elected member of Parliament to be told by basically another elected member of Parliament to shut up, and I couldn't care what position they hold, whether they're the Prime Minister or otherwise. I mean, they have no right to tell another elected member of Parliament to shut up. But yeah, this is what goes on in today's political theatre.
So what you're putting your finger on is the fact that the Parliament is not functioning the way that it's meant to. It's completely controlled by the parties, and I think we've known this for years and years. But I mean, the control is so tight now that it's not a debating
terrible,
chamber. It's not a place where there's a contest of ideas. It's a place of control and manipulation of people who are elected by the people to represent them.
Can I say, Lyle, no, I'm again not going to pull any punches. Parliament is a joke. A joke. I can't be any clearer than that. What I said in my speech, I'll double down on here. Question time, we all see it. We all know, how horrible it looks. But I mean, all this is again.
Well, George, just hold your thought there. I'll read for our audience what you said for those who haven't seen the speech. You said question time is, well, first of all, you said, I don't like coming to Canberra anymore. That's a big statement. Then you said question time is a farce where government backbenchers ask pointless questions written by someone else and opposition members ask just as pointless gotcha questions that never get answers.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. You get presented a question just before you go into question time, half an hour before, this is your question. Oh, really? My question? Wow. And I think once in the history of the place, someone actually went off script and gave their own question and never got another question again. So anyway, they don't do that anymore. But it's worse than that. That's just the thing we see, right? But everything else, there's this thing that happens after question time every day called matters of public importance, which amounts to nothing more than a high school style debating club. Yeah. It is pointless. We have motions that come before the parliament that are never voted on. So they just become debating points. There's no point for them. The legislation that we have, the votes and proceedings, the actual guts of the work of parliament, you could say, you could pretty much dial it in, Lyle, because, as I said in my speech, if it's a government bill, we'll get up and speak in favour of it. If we're government members, the opposition members probably speak against it. The independents will go one way or the other. And
so regardless of the merits, regardless of the truth of the matter.
Yeah, we might throw in a few things about our electorate or something like that, which is just neither here nor there. And at the end of the day, we'll all go into our corners when the vote happens. And you could pretty much dial it in. You don't actually need 150 people to leave all four corners of the country and come to the nation's capital, spend all that money on that, save the exercise, and just have one person go there with a whole heap of proxies. It's either that, or you have true representation where people can actually make a stand and vote according to their consciences.
Well, that's interesting. And sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you because you've made the point that I think I was getting at. Because you said in your speech that the way the Australian Parliament functions isn't necessarily the way that other legislatures in other countries function. There's a bit more freedom to depart from the party line where people feel strongly about matters.
Yeah, that's right. You even see that in the mother of parliaments, the UK Parliament. You certainly see that in the US House of Representatives, probably a little bit less these days as things have gotten a bit more partisan over there, but still there's been a history of in the UK, Tories crossing the floor on certain issues, Labor not so much, but in the US, certainly the Democrats and the Republicans, they could even team up on things. I mean, there's jointly sponsored bills that used to happen over in the US. So it can happen in Australia. It's just that the party system is so rigid in enforcing what they call discipline because of the whole mantra that's thrust at MPs over and over again, and that's disunity is death. Well, there's another word for disunity. It's called individualism, and I thought that's what centre-right parties prided themselves on was the spirit of individualism and individual enterprise, but it's snuffed out as soon as you walk into the gate in Canberra.
Well, it's interesting you say that because you're someone who's been seen as a maverick. That's a term that the media use as a pejorative against you. Yet watching your speech and the reaction of your colleagues in the chamber, people that I know you've publicly clashed with, like Michael McCormack, the former Deputy Prime Minister, you referred to him as your friend. The camera did a close-up on him as you were talking. dialoguing with him in your speech, and the warmth was real. So what you're saying is that it doesn't have to be this rigid discipline. There is scope, and you've proven that you can be a maverick, you can disagree, you can be outspoken, but you can still be collegial and have friends at the same time. People don't realise that, I don't think.
No, I think that there's too much 2D characterizations and character assassinations when it comes to federal politics. But look, the word maverick itself, I mean, I've seen them all: maverick, rogue, renegade, you name it, insert the adjective here. That they go on and on with all of these sort of names, but you're right. It's just pejoratives for people who are thinking for themselves, and I wouldn't have thought that actually we would have that. Now, there's something to be said that if you're going to disagree with your party, 80% of the time, well, perhaps you shouldn't be in the party, but we're not even talking about disagreeing 80% of the time. Lyle, if you look at my voting record, I mean, you'd probably find somewhere in 99% voting with my own side. Even if you choose to vote 1 or less than 1% of the time, another way, or you argue something slightly different, you're seen as a rogue and a maverick. Yeah. It adds to this whole misnomer of disunity as death, which basically is to crush any form of dissent within the party systems.
It's interesting you mentioned the labels they threw at you, maverick, etc. But you used some colourful language in your speech to describe the sort of politician you were. You talked about Poodles versus Mongrels. I was quite surprised when I saw that on the news last week.
Yeah, there probably weren't a lot of the ministers that would have been happy about me using that language. But anyway,
Well, just unpack for our audience who haven't seen your speech. What did you mean by what's a political poodle and what's a political mongrel?
Well, I can't lay claim to it. It was actually Andrew Laming who said that to me, and he said that there's poodles and there's mongrels in this place, and the poodles will get to be accustomed to the ministerial leather. The mongrels will be the one that gets things. Are going to be the ones that get things done around here, and I sort of. Added to the story, I said something along the lines of, they might be mangy, they might bark when they're grumpy, and they might soil the carpet sometimes. But at the end of the day, they do bark when it's needed, and they also bite when it's needed. And ultimately, they keep the political poodles accustomed to the ministerial leather that that they want to be accustomed to. So, that's. And there's, like anything, you can take that too far. But I mean, there's a bit of truth to this. If you do everything that is considered right, if you dot your I's, cross your T's, and you mind your P's and Q's, you don't speak out of school, you will probably end up being promoted. And, you can see over the course of the years when there's something negative on the horizon. Let me use the analogy of the Royal Commission, right?
Yeah, I was going to come to that. Yeah. That was one of the times when you where you went a bit mongrel and went against your own government when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister.
Yeah, and so to use it though as an analogy, like. This was a slow-moving train wreck, and it was a slow-moving train wreck for the government at that time of their own making. I mean, it was quite obvious to me a few years out from the decision, not the decision eventually to have it, but when the decision of the government was we're not going to have it, it was quite obvious to me that was not in step with the mood of the Australian public. We had a media that was becoming more and more incessant on having it, and actually, if you looked at the problem itself, there was definitely a need to have it. So why you would maintain this move against it, I don't know. But there's so many things like that crop up in politics. And it's if everyone's going to be just my party right or wrong, well, you're going to walk off the proverbial cliff altogether. Yeah. You know, it's only those people that going, guys, I see there's an issue here. I think that we better do something about this. And guys, you're not listening. I'm going to have to get louder and louder and louder. And then they blame you. Shut up. Don't say anything about that. Pull your head back in. You're the one causing the problem. No, I'm not causing the problem. You're just not seeing the problem that's there, and you're not seeing what's got to be done to actually rectify the situation. So it's only people like that that are sounding the alarm bells that actually wake up the rest of them and pull them back into line so that they're actually they're able to be elected, I guess.
And I don't think anyone today would say that what you did to force the Banking Royal Commission was the wrong thing to do. You've been vindicated by history there because of the way that commission exposed the pain and the maltreatment of people by the banking and superannuation industry.
As deficient as that Royal Commission was, and I do think it was deficient, but you're right. I mean, within the government, there aren't too many people. Publicly, at least, who would say that was not what should have happened.
Yeah, George, you said in your speech, you quoted the I think 4th century Christian theologian Saint Athanasius. You said, "If this world is against the truth, then I am against the world." What are the big lies that you've encountered in 11 years as a parliamentarian?
Oh, lol.
Where do you start?
Where do I start? Firstly, the insertion of Athanasius, while I love him, it was a promise to someone that I'd quote Athanasius in a speech, so I've done that. Now, look, the big lies of our time, is that what you mean, or do you mean the lies?
There's lots that you and I could talk, but what do you see? You say if this world is against the truth, I'm against the world, and I think with all the woke stuff and the things that you've been talking about today, it's not territory that is conducive to people of our values. But what are the say 2 or 3 of the top lies that you've encountered that have caused probably the most damage in your view, that just seem as intractable lies that we just can't seem to shift through our political and cultural system?
Yeah. Well, look, I'll flip it and I'll tell you the truths that are pushed back on, which is just as good as the lies. I mean, obviously, one of the truths that's pushed back on is that free speech should be free. I mean, we suddenly have all these caveats. Well, as long as you don't offend this group or offend that group, or as long as your views aren't about this topic, So this is one of the lies, and it's a lie that's actually going to be very, very harmful to democracy, Lyle. We silence free speech to our detriment. So that's probably the biggest one of them all, I would say. Followed up closely by the fact that the truth, I would say, that people should be free to express their faith. It's in exactly the same vein, but now we put a little caveat on the side of it. Again, as long as it doesn't offend others, as long as it's not talking about specific aspects. So these are the two big ones to me: freedom of speech and freedom of faith. And anything that goes against that word freedom, to me, is a lie.
So can I just pick up on that then? Why do you think there isn't the will and the courage in the Parliament of Australia, across the political divide, to defend free speech? I mean, this is a basic Australian value that you and I have grown up with. The idea that we're having a discussion in 2022 that says that freedom of speech and freedom of religion is not what it should be in a country like Australia. I mean, if you'd have told me we'd be having this discussion when I was a kid, I would have laughed at you. I thought, never in Australia. This is core to our value. Why aren't our politicians going to the barricades on this?
Yeah. Look, I think it just goes back to what I said at the start, that politics is downstream of culture. The cultural institutions have largely been captured by people who don't believe that free speech should be free, that there should be freedom of expression of people's faith. They just simply don't believe it. They are more in line with identity politics and everything that flows from that, rather than the politics of freedom, if I can.
So you've said this a couple of times tonight, and I've heard the phrase many times. Politics is downstream of culture. I'd like to think they sort of work both ways a bit. But and you're leaving the parliament as a relatively young man who is very articulate. You're an experienced parliamentarian. You could easily serve in that role for another 10 or 20 years quite easily. But you seem to think that it's almost pointless now. So those of us who are concerned about the trajectory of this nation, what hope is there for us through trying to influence the political system? Or are you saying there is none and we've got to try and work through cultural institutions?
No. Certainly not. I still think that there is a point right now to being in politics, and I'll get to that. Could I just add to what I was previously saying though about culture, and that is that the cultural institutions in this country, academia, the press, largely the press, but even corporations now, big tech, we could go on and on and on. That they dominate the inputs that go in towards public thinking. They dominate the inputs, and when the inputs are dominated with one stream of thought, it's only going to be it's a foregone conclusion what's going to come out of the public consciousness, right? And so why are politicians scared to have these debates and discussions? Because they think that if they get up and they say, the sky is blue on a topic like that, then the roof's going to fall down on top of them, because all of the cultural institutions or the news media organisations and all the rest of it, they'll start screaming at them, and then the public will pile on. That's why they're worried. They're worried existentially almost about their political lives. So there's that, but politics still does serve a purpose. Boy, we need to get in and clean up the cultural institutions. That's a very, very long march indeed. That's a long march. Until then, the job, I believe, of most right-thinking, use that in all the meanings of the word, the right-thinking politicians out there, is to be like the boy with his finger in the damn wall, holding back the sludge, the flood of bad laws, holding back whatever we can until we're able to, perform some sort of surgery on the culture, until we're able to get the culture back into some sort of semblance of what you and I would see as normality.
Yep. Well, George, none of us begrudge you leaving, although obviously many like myself are disappointed. But listening to your speech and knowing you, as I've had the privilege of knowing you for some years, knowing that you've got a lovely wife and a beautiful 2-year-old daughter, and you've spent the best part of 18 years in public life, if you account your time at Macquarie City Council as an elected councillor there. So none of us begrudge you going back and being a bit of a hobbit in the Shire, and Mackay's a beautiful place. But you're not going away, are you? A lot of people keep asking me, what's George Christensen going to do next? But you've set up Nation First. You've got a platform. You're still going to be a voice, I take it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I talked about this, the cultural institutions. I mean, that we've got to try and not recapture, but I think actually part of it is establishing our own cultural institutions, or establishing our own segments within what we call these cultural institutions, and fighting on from there. And there's something, the term mainstream media is now morphed into legacy media.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, anyone who has some journalistic nous, who has an internet connection, who has a webcam, can actually take on the big mainstream media organisations. And if you think that that's, kind of hokey and cute, well, have a look over in the US where people like Glenn Greenwald now are branching out in themselves and actually taking on the powers that be, where there are outfits like Blaze TV that have started up that are challenging some of the mainstream or normal cable or free to air TV stations. So this is what I'm talking about, and I think more and more of that is going to happen as time goes on.
And is that what you're going to be doing as well, George? You've built quite a substantial platform with Nation First. Are we going to see you in the alternative media space?
I'm going to use the.
You can announce it here tonight, George.
Well, what I'll announce is this: I've got a background in journalism, I've got a background in politics, and I'm going to use those two forces of evil for good.
I think a lot of people will be heartened to hear your voice is still going to be out there, George, and you're still in the fight, just in a different part of the battlefield. George, I said to you at the start, I'd only take 10 or 15 minutes of your time. I think I've taken double of that, but it's always interesting to talk to you, and I know people love hearing from you, and I really appreciate what you've done. Thanks for your service to our nation, and I'd encourage everyone to go and listen to your speech. You'll be affected emotionally by it, by the intelligence of it, by the common sense of it. Where can they get your speech, George? YouTube, your website?
Yeah, if they go to YouTube and they type in George Christensen's final speech to Parliament, I think they should find that.
Great. Everyone should listen to it. George, thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for Macquarie Street this week. If you'd like to know more about the real issues that confront our nation, get a hold of my book. It's called, I Kid You Not, Notes from 20 Years in the Trenches of the Culture Wars. You won't believe what our politicians are getting away with because the media cover up the real story when it comes to abortion, family policy, and so much more. The book is available from my website, lyleshelton.com.au. That's lyleshelton.com.au. Thanks so much to Dave Pillow and Aidan at The Good Source News for production. Without their help, I couldn't bring you this podcast. Finally, thank you for your company. I love the chance to bring this information to you and hope you find it helpful. Please share it on your social media platforms so that others can know about it too. Until next week, goodbye.